Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the Next Chapter in Schools podcast. I'm your host, Peter Young with Corvessa Partners. We're really excited to have with us today Dr. Chris Bogart. He's the executive director at Sasko River Center in Darien, Connecticut. In about a minute, Chris, I'll go ahead and have you introduce yourself to all of us. Just for context here, for everybody's sake, the goal for today's episode is to explore how school culture functions as a primary factor in a child's psychological health and to identify the hidden risks when schools and institutions settle for what I call sort of a good enough school culture. So, with that framing in mind, Chris, I'll go ahead and have you introduce yourself, give us a sense of who you are, your background, and anything else you want us to know, and then we'll go from there.
Great. Thank you, Peter, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. It's, I think, an incredibly important area to look at and an area that I think is getting a lot more attention, well deserved, because what we're learning about children being able to learn, if they are not in a place where they're psychologically comfortable, they're not going to be able to take in information. So really great topic to be talking about. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, have been practicing, and this is always scary for me to say, but I've been practicing for 40 years now. I started when I was 43. No, I mean, when I was three. I missed the joke there. Anyway, my background has been pretty much totally in the field of child and adolescent psychology, working both as a private practitioner, working with kids in therapeutic situations, as well as doing evaluations. But over my career, what I've kind of moved towards is doing a lot of work with various schools and school districts. And Sasko River Center itself is a multidisciplinary child development center. We work with kids with learning issues, behavioral issues, academic issues. We do a lot of individual work. We do a lot of evaluation work. We go into schools and train teachers, and we do a lot of work supporting schools when they have children that they're having a difficult time educating properly. And my own trajectory over the last 5 years has been working more and more with private and public schools in the area, doing a lot of professional development with teachers around areas connected to school culture, so things relating to how to have a positive behavior management type approach within a classroom, doing discussions around restorative practices in schools, executive functions support in class so the kids feel mastery over how they're approaching new learning situations. So it's an area that I love and feel passionate about. So happy to be here to talk to you about more.
Right. And to start your work at the age of 43 and to have gone for 40 years from there, that's amazing, Chris, by the way. I want to pick up on a phrase that you use, which I find fascinating. You use the phrase when students feel, quote, psychologically comfortable. And I'm just curious to know, again, having been a principal for 15 years, a school teacher for almost 10 years, in your experience working with schools, and of course, don't name a school, but in general, when you go to schools and what are the conditions that you see, Chris, when students are feeling psychologically comfortable? And I guess the converse to that question is true too. What are some of the things that you've seen in schools where students are saying, I'm not, or, your sense is they're not psychologically comfortable?
Yeah, so I mean, so what it goes under, I guess, in general, would be the area of school climate, right? So it's the relationship that builds between teachers and their students. It's the relationship that the school administration has with teachers and then students and their parents. And so when I say that kids are psychologically comfortable, what I mean is that they feel going into a classroom that the teacher is truly there because they want to be there. The teacher is interested in getting to know them as a student, and they feel like even if they might be coming up against challenging material or they might not bring their best on a particular day, they still have a place within that setting, and that they don't feel a sense of shame or disadvantage in terms of being able to sort of bring their whole self to school. So it's really around the child feeling like that they are, they have a spot where they feel accepted within the classroom, no matter what type of a learner they might be. And then I think going connected to that, Peter, is also the idea of just feeling safe physically, that the school has a real emphasis upon making sure that even kids when they're dysregulated, they're not bringing a lot of aggressive behaviors to school. That there's a sense of safety walking through the hallways, a sense of safety in the lunchroom, and just physically not being ever at a position where they've got to be looking over their shoulder because kids are not being properly
Right.
managed by the school team.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. Again, I think as a school principal myself, yeah, those relationships and setting sort of a role model, not just myself, but with the teachers. And I think, as adults, we're always on and students are always watching us. And so I think, yeah, that's insightful. Curious to know a little bit more. You mentioned earlier also, you go in, you work with schools, teachers to think about sort of more positive behavior management systems, either naming specific systems or not. But again, just curious to know sort of what are some of the qualities of those? Because again, somebody watching this episode could be a teacher, could be a school administrator, could be a parent, student, whomever. And so what would you say to them if they're curious to know more about sort of what are some of those traits of, a positive classroom management system, for example?
Sure. Yeah. So the most relevant and most recent in my own mind is the state of Connecticut over the summer of 2025 put into practice an updated school climate policy and expectation across the entire state, and it was focused upon the broad umbrella of what is known as restorative practices, bringing situations where there's specific opportunities on a daily basis for teachers to meet with their students around any challenges that might be coming up in the classroom. They might start their day with what's called a circle, where they sit down and talk about any issues going on, celebrate successes, and then within that, if there is a student who's having difficulty for whatever reason regulating themselves, there's the opportunity for that student to either meet individually with a teacher or one of the school counselors and have support and working their way through that, and then support re-entering the community so that they don't have to feel like they're in the doghouse on a continual basis. Then connected to that, at least here in Fairfield County of Connecticut, where I've been running some of these teacher trainings, it really has been bringing back strategies that I think teachers have been using successfully for many, many years. It's nothing earth-shattering or new. Really working on helping teachers understand the power of catching kids when they're doing what they should be doing, as opposed to reacting when they're doing things they shouldn't be doing. It is looking at the ratio of number of positive comments that they're making to their students as opposed to any sort of corrective comments. So like that, that algorithm of 4 positives to 1 negative type of thing. It's about setting up, depending upon the developmental level of the kids, but setting up appropriate target behaviors and what are the rewards that they can access for reaching these. So it's basic positive behavior management type situations that might be a sticker chart, or it might be access to some other tangible reward or social reward that kids might have access to at different. So the way we've been doing training is talking about, let's look at what you already have in your tool belt as a teacher, and let's just remember all these different components and kind of look as a school, where are a couple that we might want to emphasize as a school. Now let's bring in this restorative practice language and teach you how to run a circle in a productive way, teach you how to have a restorative conversation, some of those different components.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm going to ask this question just because I experienced it firsthand as a principal. Most recently, when I was here in Maryland as a principal, too, definitely had restorative practices sort of at the center of what we did. We were also followed a lot of the tenets of responsive classroom, which I'm sure you're familiar with as well. But I would hear from parents, sometimes teachers, but mostly parents. Okay, I understand restorative practices, but then nothing happened, or the kid didn't get in trouble, or what did you do, Mr. Young, quote unquote, Mr. Young, the principal. And so I guess what's your response to parents who maybe don't see, quote unquote, anything happening as a result of sort of implementing it? And again, it sounds like the state of Connecticut, which I would wholeheartily agree with, moving in this direction. But that was a narrative that I sometimes had to fight with parents. So I'm just curious to know sort of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it is a great comment and question, and something that comes up in every professional development I do around this. And every time I do a parent talk, it's brought up as well. mean, first, what I generally go down is the path of really being able to empathize with where they're coming from. That for the kids who are behaving really well, for them to not see the child who is acting out or might be disrupting their learning, to not see that child have any consequence, brings up in us a sense of, is this fair? It's not fair that this kid's getting away with
Right.
it. And could that then be a domino that triggers off other kids to say, well, if you're not going to get in trouble, I might as well do X, Y, and Z as well. So I empathize with that piece. Then I bring in the research that shows that schools that focus predominantly on reactive negative consequences tend to actually have more incidents of acting out behavior. That when we start getting into that reactive mode, there's a lot of research that suggests that this actually does create more of a coercive cycle that doesn't
Right.
lead to a good place. And so what I say is, what's most helpful is to try to approach this from the evidence-based perspective, that when a school shifts to a much more proactive, positive, catching kids when they're doing right, really being able to call out the kids who are doing the things in the way that you want the classroom's expectations to fall in line with, that when
Right.
you have that focus, all of a sudden the balance starts to tilt in that direction of kids actually doing more to try to get that positive regard. What I then also say is that in these corrective or these restorative conversations, restorative moments where they might be meeting with the school counselor, they might be meeting one-on-one with their teacher, the child who is having difficulty regulating or might be acting out. In those conversations, there is a discussion of, what did you do? Do you understand why you crossed over what the expectations are here? What can you do next time to do this? There is a focus on
For sure.
what is the behavior? Let's define it. Let's talk about what this might be triggering in some of your classmates or your teachers and stuff like that. And what are you going to do differently next time? So there is that
Yep.
focus. It's just not done in this public way that
Right.
could lead a kid to feel either anger or shame or whatever that could lead them to act out even more down the line.
Yeah. No, it's again, it's a fascinating sort of dynamic because yes, again, I fully support the approach and have seen the benefits of that approach, right? And being proactive, like you said earlier, with forming those relationships, maintaining those positive relationships. And I always used to say as a principal, I never wanted my first interaction with a student or a teacher or a parent to be after they've gotten in trouble or to be a negative, to have to share negative. So if I've done my job and gotten to know the people in the building, then inevitably that first conversation will never be negative. So that if and when we do get to that kind of conversation, there's that rapport that's been established in it. And so I think that that's important too. On the flip side, right? You mentioned just a little while ago schools that maybe are in this cycle, right, of negative behavior reinforcement. Curious to know, are there certain other sort of red flags, things that you've seen in schools where that cycle does perpetuate itself? And maybe not as macro to say, oh, just not a positive behavior management system, but in digging a little bit deeper, are there certain things that you've seen? Because again, I think for people who potentially see this, they would want to know, man, how do I make sure that doesn't happen? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's actually a school that I've been working with that is, I think they're theoretically very much aligned with what I've been talking about in terms of positive school climate. And I think their educators are showing up every day trying to adapt to the situation so that they're responding in this more proactive, positive way. But they really have struggled to stay in that space predominantly because they have a particular cohort of students that have really presented some very significant behavioral challenges, partly because of some of the challenging, neurodiversity that these students are bringing to the table. That they have just a combination of some kids right now that are just very dysregulated, and so it is creating this domino effect that the classroom
Mm,
situations are being thrown off, and they have to kind of keep bringing more staff in to regulate and stuff like that. And it has kind of gone into much
right.
more of a reactive, put the fire out mode.
Gotcha.
And in those situations, I think the teaching team is becoming very tired,
Right.
frustrated. And so I think some of that's coming out and has kind of created a cycle that has been more challenging. And we haven't resolved this issue. I think what
Right.
we've done is we've really tried to emphasize the idea of as much of a collaborative team as possible, trying to bring the parents on board, to make sure the parents are understanding what's going on and trying to reinforce some of the ways that the school's trying to handle on this. And so that, so have opportunities where we can tie into potential positive reinforcement outside of school, or situations where we might just want to take down the temperature and maybe shorten a child's school day just so that they end on a positive. We're doing as much as we can to kind of tag teachers out when they're kind of hitting their limit. So having more
sure.
administrative support ready to jump in and be able to say, hey, why don't you go off and take XYZ group that might be an easier group to deal with.
Sure.
And I'll stay here for a bit. And,
right.
And looking at these ways of, again, trying to get that balance in place. But, the reality is it would be lovely if we just kind of lived in this very positive space and had these lovely conversations with students, and that totally regulated things. But sometimes there's just neurobiological issues that are really stacked against us, and that sometimes just requires a much more all hands on broader approach.
Yeah, no, for sure. I want to shift totally to a different topic, if that's okay. Sort of the intersection of AI and mental health. Obviously, as a principal, the last couple of years before I had to step away, that was sort of the early goings on of AI. Now, obviously, the work we're doing here at Corvessa, we're fully steeped in it. AI and mental health is not my lane of expertise, obviously. So I'm just curious to know, from your perspective, where are you seeing sort of AI enter into the conversation with respect to mental health? Mm-hmm. Is there a connection between what you do, AI, schools, or not? But in general, just where do you see the intersection right now of AI and mental health?
Yeah, I mean, that could definitely be another several-hour webinar, right, or podcast and stuff like that. But it's a particularly important area because I think everybody, whether they are a practitioner of 40 years or a practitioner just getting into the world, or teachers trying to figure this out, is trying to sort of look at this through the lens of how can AI help us most effectively in the goal that we have to obviously support and educate our students and to help them, be socially and emotionally balanced as well, without it unleashing something that can lead in a direction where there are unintended consequences and stuff like that. What I mean by that is, I think there have been many pieces I've read in various newspapers, articles, and things like that have focused on kind of the big bad world of AI, and AI is going to come in here and totally turn everything on its head, and it's going to lead to all of these horrible circumstances where a kid might be steered down the path of self-harm because of their connection with AI, and all of those are very real, important conversations. But as has happened probably with every new powerful tool, it gets sometimes this focus on all the dangers of it without looking at it as there's a balance here. It's a matter of looking at where it can be useful and where it can potentially not be useful. So what we've been working on here at Sasco River Center is having conversations with our therapists and our educators around the how can they intersect with their patients, clients in a way that embraces the idea of there could be some really wonderful positives that you can tap into with AI, such as being able to reinforce some of the skill building that you might be working on in therapy, like some of the DBT, dialectic behavior therapy, or cognitive behavior therapy strategies. AI can be a really interesting part to be able to tap into some of these strategies outside of your session, to be able to monitor your progress, to be able to remind you some of the things that you worked on in a session, to be able to use during one of those more vulnerable emotional moments outside of a session, but also to have conversations with our clients to very clearly say, the risk factor is AI is it is a language-based model. It's just picking up your language. And so, if you're saying something that might be actually negative thinking, or something that might take you down a rabbit hole that might not be therapeutic, AI is just going to sometimes reinforce some of those negative ways of looking at things, or might be starting out the conversation way of like, oh wow, that's a really interesting way to think, Peter, why don't you tell me more about that? That's AI's language-based model. That's not AI sitting there as a reasonable person saying, well, wait a minute, that's maybe a distorted way to look at things. What we're working on is rather than, trying to throw out the baby with the bathwater, and also accepting the reality that AI is here to stay. Trying to put the genie
Right.
back in the bottle is not going to happen. So let's learn how to really accentuate its gifts to us, and also make sure that we're sounding the possible danger places, and really trying to get kids and young adults and adults to really think in a very reasonable, reflective fashion about how to really integrate this best.
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, no, I have one friend in particular who's in the mental health space, and he and I just have conversations back and forth. I think he's fully in support, sort of what you're saying, and yeah, we need to move in that direction. But how do you do that in a mindful and meaningful way? So we just, again, I'm not an expert, but in the world of mental health, it's just very different, obviously, than a law firm. I don't know why I said that, but just a law firm. I think it's just a very different model, obviously, and so I think people are walking a little bit more on eggshells right now, but still trying to figure out what does that look like. So yeah, so I appreciate that perspective. Just sort of to close here, I always like to do this with the guests. I'm going to give you the last word here, Chris, to just share again. How can people get in touch with you? Is there something that you just want to make sure that you get out into the ether, either about yourself or the work you do at Sasko River? And then we'll close up after that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, so I would love people to check out what we're doing, tap into our website, which is saskoriver.com, www.saskoriver.com. The model that we've created there is something that we're incredibly proud of. It's taking what I think are a lot of, expert individual approaches and blending it together in a multidisciplinary setting. So we work with kids and families through psychotherapy, expert neuropsychological assessments, occupational therapy, speech and language support, learning support, medication management. It's all under one roof. The team works together as a collaborative, non-hierarchical team with the belief that everybody has different training, but we can blend it together in a way to really benefit the child, the family, to be able to really make some great headway. So I'd love folks to check out what we do. Schools that might be interested in professional development, check out our team of professionals, and love the fact that Peter, you reached out to me and gave me this opportunity to share a little bit about my thinking.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and again, thank you, Dr. Bogart, for joining us today. That will be the end of our episode today. Thank you again for tuning in. I'm your host, Peter Young with Corvessa Partners.